Hi everyone. This is an interview with Steve Higginbottom, who's head of housing at Thornton Lowe. Steve and I are going to sit down and run through some information on Steve's background and also how we can enrich your current system and your current services within grounds maintenance, and have a bit of a conversation about how Thornton Lowe housing can help you do that. So, Steve, if you can just tell us a bit about your background and your experience in grounds maintenance, housing, and contract management.
Yeah, sure, Chris, no problem. So I have been involved in different forms of horticulture since 1993 when I left Horticultural College. I started in sort of garden maintenance and then landscaping, got into commercial grounds maintenance. Then I started to win some initial work in the housing association sector, which, back in the early 90s was very small. These housing associations were very small in size. They had a few hundred houses each. We got into that. We were successful. There was only a few housing associations at the time. I think Northern Counties was probably the first one that we started working with. And this area just exploded and grew. They grew and grew and grew. They developed and developed more and more properties because we delivered a good service for them and they liked what we did and how we did it. They kept with us and we grew with them. And over time, there was more housing associations, more development, more properties. Then they started to merge and get taken over by each other. And, nowadays, these housing associations have got 60, 70, 80,000 properties. And at the time, we were one contractor working for all of them, really. So that's what we did. We built a network of depots throughout the UK, a few hundred people on the ground, started with a lot of youngsters that we brought through apprentice schemes, built them up, sent them out to run depots and become contract managers and get a good infrastructure in place. And we grew with these companies. They became national, we became national, or certainly have a lot of bigger geographical areas. And we worked with them, and whatever the buzz was at the time, we jumped on it and worked with them on it, because we specialise in just delivering the housing sector. We were always up there and knew what was going on, and they were the sectors we moved in rather than grounds maintenance more generally,
Right. No, that's really good. And this was with Green Fingers, wasn't it? Your previous company where you built up over, like you say, a series of years and just developed with your clients.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I founded Green Fingers back in sort of 93 and built it up from there, really. And I left the business 4 years ago now. The company was taken over by a much larger national company who are now known as Tivoli.
Right. Okay, no, that's great. And can you just explain a bit about your approach in when we go onto site initially and we do an initial site audit as Thornton Lowe Housing, particularly sort of the terms around assessing what the existing delivery is like, what the specs like, and levels of customer satisfaction, that kind of thing, really.
Yeah, the approach follows a pretty standard process, really, when we go in to do a review. First of all, we request a lot of information, and it's a desktop exercise to start with. So we send the client a very detailed, long list of everything, and we're looking at things like contracts and specifications, service level agreements. We're looking at all the internal processes and how they work, the systems, their IT. We look at their asset list, their equipment, vehicles, how they finance these, how they manage them, service them, run them. Then we get into the staffing structure, the management structure, and again, the processes involved with how they manage that. The personnel, we look at all the personnel. We want to see, their experience, the length of service, the average age, where they come from. Then we will interview these people. We'll interview the personnel. We'll interview the management from the top all the way through the tree, really. Then we get out to sites and we will come and have a look at the depots and the infrastructure of how they deliver it. We then look at the sites. We go out and we meet the clients. Like when I say the clients, I mean the residents, because it's their customers, We'll meet them. We'll have surgeries and drop-ins where people will come and tell us about the service, and we'll find out where they feel we're going right and where we're not, and we'll dig into that a lot further. We'll do a lot of assessment of what the current quality and standards are like out there on the site. Look at, what processes they're using to deliver the service. We'll do surveys with customers as well, you know, because not everyone
Yeah.
can attend the surgeries. So
Yeah.
we get a lot of feedback like that. We'll also do colleague surveys. So everyone within the organisation who's involved in the service. So this could be like the housing department if it's a separate sector. But we want to see what everybody thinks the perception of the services, whether it's the customer or whether it's the wider people within the organization. What's the perception and why, and how do you think we can improve it? What do you think we do well, what do you don't? And we'll dig into these and we'll explain in a lot of detail in our report, you know, why some of these things can be done and what can't be done and what's working, why it's working, and so forth. But if they have if they're not a DLO and they have contractors, we will speak with the client, with the contractors who are delivering the contract at the moment, and find out what they think works well and what doesn't, and why. Because sometimes it can be about the relationship between these two parties, the customer and the contractor, and the residents, that where there's a breakdown in communication, or breakdown in, you know, working together, joined up working, that can be one of the big problems in these things. So that's kind of the approach and how it works, really. There's a lot of sitting down, though, and going through a lot of documentation and interviewing and speaking to people. I always say the more we know and the more we're told and the more open and transparent you are, the more accurate we can be with our assumptions.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. I mean, you mentioned briefly there DLOs, direct labour organisations. What's the difference, really briefly, between sort of those two setups, like between a DLO and normal
contractor? So DLO is when an organisation of any size, particularly like a housing association, is delivering the service themselves. So it's either could be cleaning, could be window cleaning, could be pest control, could be grounds maintenance, could be arboriculture. This is where they're delivering the service in-house. So they'll have a management structure in place, they'll have the equipment, they'll have the means, the systems, the processes, and they'll go out and deliver the service, and they charge that back through a service charge. When you've got a contracted out service, you've got this being managed by the housing association, but then it's tendered out to a contractor. So the contractor who has got to charge VAT at 20% is going to have a profit margin in there, and he's open to a lot of other outside factors that are outside the main housing association's control. That's the big difference, and they can deliver totally different things. It doesn't mean you don't need to be a massive housing association to have a DLO or to deliver in-house service. We work with housing associations, we're very small, who deliver it in-house. There's a huge difference, and there's pros and cons to both ways.
Okay, no, that's great. And you mentioned briefly, but when we conduct sort of a full audit, it's a real sort of boots on the ground service where, you know, we're not just dealing with management, we're actually going into to the setup, and we're conducting surveys and interviewing staff, we're interviewing the actual residents themselves. That's to get sort of a real rounded perspective of how the service is received. That's fair, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I say, we'll have these drop-in sessions with residents, and all the vocal key residents come to these. We'll survey, but we'll also look at previous surveys for up to 5 years and see what the results have been previously. We'll look at all historical feedback and complaints registers and dig into that and see if we can see patterns, and find out why these trends happen. We'll also look online, though, on social media, what graphs the perception of what people feel the housing association is doing in regards to delivering the service.
Right. No, brilliant. That's great. And in terms of like when you've been on ground and you've gone through and you've done the initial audit, how do you sort of draw up and segregate sort of short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals for sort of developing off the back of that audit?
Yeah, sure. Quite simple, this, if I'm honest. Your short-term are quick wins. Things that I see whilst I'm there, and I think from my experience, you can change this. You can change. I've seen it as a previous housing association I worked with, or I've seen it when I delivered it myself, or I can just see a better way of doing it. These are quick wins. These are things that, you know, the residents, the client side, and the operatives will engage with and embrace quickly. That will give you short-term gain very quickly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
some of these
absolutely.
things can make a huge difference on the ground. Medium term, this is the sort of where the magic happens, really. This is where we go into a lot more depth about the processes and the systems, IT, efficiencies, good practices. And we will then put these recommendations down. And these are what the team that we lead behind, often supported by ourselves, but the team we lead behind, this is what we recommend they do to develop and move the service in a more forward-thinking, more efficient, more cost-effective manner.
Gotcha.
Long term, I always say with long term, it's more of a wish list. This is what we'd like to be doing. So we'd like to be working out of a better depot, or we'd like to have more than one depot, or we'd like to be operating this type of equipment, or we want to be tendering ourselves and working for other housing associations and winning work and looking at as a more commercial operation. It might be that we want to deliver other services like take pest control in-house or take our arboriculture in-house, or sometimes put some of these services back out to tender. It might be developing biodiversity, improving mapping, GIS systems, getting the right IT systems on board if they're more expensive. But it's a bit of a wish list, you know, short term, things we're going to do over the next 90 days. Medium term, it's what we're going to do over the next year, 18 months. Long term, things that, you know, we might start to put in place more sooner, but could take a few years to get us where we need to be. A wish list is probably the best way.
No, that's perfect. So sort of aspirational goals that can be, you know, a year, 2 years plus down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that's great. And when I know, I think we've been through very briefly, but can you sort of describe a bit about how we pull together all this feedback and present it, present these findings of the audit in sort of a way that really adds value?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can imagine once we've done a week or two at our desk of interviewing people and looking at all the paperwork and historical information, then we go out and spend a week on site meeting a lot more people, and then we do the customer thing. We start to have a lot of information. Usually at the end of the first week, once I've been on site with a client, I like to sit down with the directors and the management team, the people who procured and asked for this review and appraisal, really. Not necessarily the people involved in the delivery. It's usually people above that. And I'll tell them exactly where they are in black and white, honestly, open, transparent. It's not always pleasant hearing, you know what I mean? And I think often the client will know that and is expecting that. And often it coming from somebody independent with experience, it puts a lot more emphasis on it, you know, and puts it there in black and white, and also then shows them the way forward. So we can have up to 3-hour debrief on this, and, you know, we'll go through everything. It's their opportunity to really fire back questions at me and say, well, what about this? And why is this happening? Who's doing that? You know, often a lot of this they don't know about. And they certainly would only know it from one perspective. From when I come in, they've seen it from a completely open and different perspective, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
Then the report usually comes. This can be 2 to 3 weeks later. This is a lot more detailed. This is going through everything we've found, why it's happened, what's good practice, and how they can get from where it is to where it needs to be. But it'll also highlight a lot of things they might be doing well and they want to keep using. And, you know, we might use them as case studies somewhere else in the future. The document, when it comes, it can be up to 100 pages long. You know, yourself, you've been involved in working in them. They've got lots of different ways of detailing stuff to make it interesting reading and make it appealing to the eye. It might be that there's some people that will scan it and only pick out certain parts if they're at the top of the food chain, but people further down might want to digest it in a lot more detail, and it allows you to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. And like you say, from both of our experience in producing these reports in the past, it's not so much an opportunity to sort of really push and highlight on the things that are done poorly, but it's also, you know, recognizing areas that, like you say, that have been done really well, and we can use these as case studies and to highlight that there are, you know, there's good work being done as well. So I think that's really important point that you made.
Yeah, absolutely. And often then after that, we'll go to a challenge the ideas sort of forum really, where we might take the top tier and the next level down, and then let them come to me and challenge some of the things that I've might have put forward, and some of the ways we feel we can move forward, so they can dig into it in more depth and look at it from different perspectives.
Great. No, perfect. And in terms of, when we've had the report's been produced, and we're looking at sort of mobilizing these new processes now, and putting these might be sort of, like you say, the quick wins, the short-term things. How do you sort of bring these in and sort of mobilize these new processes to get sort of a smooth transition with the client and the contractor?
Yeah, mobilisation is something that's very important. It's something we will plan for with the client right from the beginning of the procurement exercise. It's not something that we want to wait to contract award for, because this can be sort of make or break point. It'll involve often training at different levels of the team that are going to manage this contract. We'll also help facilitate and support the client in this, and it's often in a ongoing sort of mentoring or critical friend sort of elements is where we are there to stand by and hold hands. And it might be helping them through the contract meetings for the first 12 months. If it goes in, the boat starts to get a bit rocky, we can help jump in there and assist again from an independent perspective. So mobilisation is something that shouldn't be rushed, or something that shouldn't be, needs ample amount of thought process really, and time to get it right.
Yeah, you're getting a really good sort of mobilization plan together that's structured for everyone. Then I guess that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, got to involve the whole team. Definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, and I know we have mentioned briefly about typical elements that have been overlooked in a housing association's plan or ground maintenance plan. Typically, what do you see with your experience of with Greenfingers and also with Thornton Lowe? What are sort of typical things that are overlooked, and what kind of impact do those things have?
Yeah, so I think the main points for me, from my experience, are engaging with the residents. The residents are the customers, so engage with them right from the beginning of the process, finding out, again, what their perception of the service is and why, what they expect and what they want from the service, and make them understand what they're paying for and why they're getting what they're getting. Getting the specification right comes naturally from that. Then, by using this information, you've got to have the specification right. It's got to be bulletproof. You want to make sure a contractor knows exactly what they've got to do, when they're going to do it, and has a way of proving that they've completed it in order to process the invoice procedure beyond that, so you're not paying out monies for work that hasn't been completed. So getting the spec right is very important. Mapping is critical. Data and information is critical. How can you tender a contract if the people bidding for it haven't got the right information about what they should be delivering there on site? And then when you move to mobilisation, their operatives need this information because they're going to go out and maintain these areas. So whether it's data or whether it's mapping, it's got to be right. And residents are going to use that data too, to know whether an area should be being maintained. Data needs to be accurate. It's critical. But also, getting the right contractors. It might be if we're procuring a contract for £5 million worth of grounds maintenance, then there's a handful of people up and down the country who can do this. But if we've got a contract that's 300,000 or 400,000 or less in a remote area of the UK, we've got to do a different approach, or something like we're doing at the minute for a client in Cumbria. We will do pre-market engagement, so we will get our ear to the ground. We'll speak to residents, we'll speak to the housing people, we'll speak to other local commercial businesses, hotels, schools, councils, other housing associations in the area. We'll look at the British Association of Landscape Industries. We'll look on the European Journal of the previous contract awards for the last 5 years. But we'll get our ear to the ground and find out who the contractors are who are out there, who are currently working in these areas. And then we'll do a bit of digging around them and find out, are they doing it right? Are they doing it well? Are they the right people for us? If they are, we'll get them involved in our framework, whether we're taking the client down a framework or DPS, or whether we're taking them through a full open ITT. that's what we'll do. We'll get the right contractors pricing the work. Very important. So it's about customers, it's about the organization and their expectations in the spec, and it's about the contractor.
Right. No, I think that's really important. It's a great point about almost like vetting the organizations that you're going to be doing that project with or going to be affiliated with.
Yeah, and it's doing it from a slightly different perspective. You can send out these SQs, PQQs, call them what you want, and people will fill in all kinds of things on paper. But what we really want to know is what are these people out there actually doing? What are they delivering? Are they able to deliver what this client wants? And it's pre-market engagement. And with the new procurement regulations coming in, this is actually a big part moving forward. Another area, though, Chris, I'll say that residents overlook, not residents, housing associations overlook, is how they're going to manage this contract. The time to know, well, you're going to do this is before the procurement. Who's going to manage? Is it one person? Is it split between several people? Depends on the scale and the size. Who's involved? Is it housing? Is it asset management? A lot of effort has got to be put into managing a contract, managing the residents and their expectations, managing the PR behind it, and managing the contractor. The contractors want to be managed. They want to have a key person, a client officer that they work with, who everything filters through. And a lot of people overlook how important this is. This comes out a lot on our reviews.
Yeah, no, that's really good information. We did touch earlier on DLOs, but if you were considering assisting a client that's setting up a DLO, how would you ensure that transition for them to be using that as an offering?
Yeah, you've got to look at here the scale of what you're trying to do and the time frame. This is not something that can happen overnight. If your grounds maintenance contract is going to run out in 6 months, then you're too late for getting teams up and running and out there to take over a whole contract, whether it be 3 or 4 teams or whether it be 10 or 20 teams. It takes time and a lot of planning. You need the right support in place, but that's where me and my team at Thornton Lowe, that's what we do. That's what we've always done when we were in the private sector delivering this, and this is what we do now. So, mobilising and taking a contract in-house is simple and straightforward. There's got to be a lot of knowledge and experience around HR, legislation, health and safety, operational, equipment, route systems, geography, weather, all kinds of things that will affect it. But that's what me and my team bring to the table. So often a client is, the top tier, the directors, the board might say we want to take this service in-house, but the team directly below that have some great concerns and worries about doing that, because they'll say, we're good at building maintenance, but we've never done grounds maintenance. Well, doesn't matter, it can be done. That's where we come to the table, that's what we bring, and we will often work through the whole process with the client, holding their hand, but obviously well into mobilisation into year 1, 2 and 3 of it, maybe, as support and advice. And that might be, with literally boots on the ground if that's what it needs, as well as remote support.
Great. Okay. And like you say, if there's a transition and they're looking to transition to look down the DLO route, it's not something really that you can turn around in sort of 6-8 months. It needs a lot more further planning than that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. And how do you actually identify areas for cost savings and efficiencies as part of the audits that we do? There's a financial element to this, obviously, with wages, with upkeep of machinery, all that kind of thing that we've both been involved in. How do you do that in terms of the report, and what sort of strategies do you use to implement this kind of saving?
Yeah, most of the savings usually come through labour, not necessarily by cutting labour, but making sure we're using that labour in the most efficient and effective way. So it's not about culling the scale or the size of the workforce. It's about stopping it growing and making sure that we're using it most effectively. What a lot of people don't realise is that in the commercial sector, up to 70% of the income, the turnover that comes through the door goes straight out on labour, wages and associated costs to that, pensions and so forth. So that's a huge amount. So if you're going to start looking at where money can be saved, it comes down to labour. That's, making it work the most effective way. We'll look at things like using, is the organisation using the best and the latest equipment? Many of the parts of grounds maintenance now across the country are starting to use autonomous machines, and this is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. There was a time years ago where we'd send out 3 operatives in a vehicle. We're now down to 2 and sometimes 1 if we've got some of this bigger, cleverer machinery. Mm-hmm. So it's about looking, that's just one example, I guess, but looking at technology systems, IT, bringing IT systems in makes a huge difference on your back office, but also on the speed of getting things done on the ground. So yeah, efficiencies and looking at them areas of how it's delivered and why it's delivered that way and how can we deliver it better. One of the big things I always say at the beginning of one of these reviews with a client is that the landscape of tomorrow is very different than the landscape of yesterday. Labour was far cheaper 20 years ago. We had these huge DLOs where people would work there for life, and the grandfather, father, and son would work there. And there was hundreds of people everywhere, and they were delivering all kinds of really fancy, shiny stuff. But with the cost of labour and the shortage of labour, that's just not an option anymore. So we're looking at areas and saying, why do we cut these areas? Why are we cutting these acres and acres of sites all of the time? Is it the best way to do it? Is it efficient? Is it what the end user, the customer, the residents from them areas want out of it? And are they getting anything out of it? So we look at biodiversity, cutting carbon, as well as saving labour, but making the areas more usable, more interesting and better for nature and all of the stakeholders, really.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point. I think with, like you say, with the cost of labour going up, it's just really important that the housing association focuses the labour that you do have access to in the right areas. I guess that's the sort of the point that we're trying to make with Thornton Lowe housing, really, isn't it? Just trying to be the most efficient with what you've got.
Yeah, and obviously we've got a lot of experience of working with a lot of other housing associations in the sector and working with commercial operators. I'm being a commercial operator myself in the past. We can look at the delivery model and look at the cost and say, well, they're based up the road, similar size, they're delivering it cheaper, or they're delivering it differently, or they're making savings, or they're redeploying that labour in better ways, or actually the way you're operating is very commercially savvy and is one way that's working. And we'll help with an implementation plan with this and help the client through the process. It might be working with resident groups and getting the message out of what we're doing and why we're doing it that way, or it might be working with the unions on terms and conditions and this sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot involved in it, but these are the main areas to focus.
Great, okay. And I think finally, just to sort of recap on what we've covered as well, but also feedback from previous reports that we've had. And you've done with your experience with Greenfingers as well as with Thornton Lowe. What would your top 3 tips be for housing associations who are looking into reviewing their services with Thornton Lowe?
First one is get a review done. A lot of people are and ahhing thinking about this, and they think about it for a long period of time while the service isn't improving out there. Get a thorough, independent, transparent review done that digs into everything that we've just talked about. And then at least at the end of that, where you are, where it's going right, where it's not, where the money's being spent right, where it's not, where the customer's happy, where they're not, where the operatives are happy, where they're not, where the contractor's happy, where they're not. Dig right into it and have it there in black and white. And then as a management team and working with ourselves, we can devise a plan to get you there. So that's the first bit. The second thing is get the spec and the delivery model right. As I've just said, the landscape of tomorrow is different than the landscape of yesterday. So that's where that aspect comes in, really. Make sure that what we're delivering is the right fit for now, for the customers, for their expectations, for the budget. It's very important to residents in housing associations what they're actually paying the service charge, how much it is. It can make a big difference. So that's important. And then, touched on it slightly earlier, management and monitoring is very, very important. Use technology, use IT, use systems. A lot of housing associations undercut this aspect. They might get the greatest contractor in the country. They might have a fantastic spec written, might have the customers on board, but if they don't manage this day to day on the ground, then it will not succeed. It will slowly decline. You can't underestimate this. We always used to say that data is key. For 30 years, we ran our business on headline data being delivered to us by email every single morning, telling us, which contracts were running well, where they were getting the best feedback, where they weren't, where the operatives were working the most efficiency and getting the best efficiencies, whether it's financial stuff or performance stuff, whether it's on HR and attendance and sickness, everything. Data is key. You get these headline figures, you can start to make changes instantly by lunchtime that day, rather than waiting till well down the line until you start getting complaints and problems from a contractor or from a resident, and then thinking, all right, what can we do about this and try to change the direction. We were data driven, always had this information up to date all the time, using the latest IT, keeping the back office down to a minimum, and then use this data by making quick decisions and working promptly. So they would be my key tips, really, if you want to run a successful DLO.
Great. And when you say about IT and having the ability to have that really quick feedback, what are some sort of examples of modern IT that's involved in grounds maintenance?
Yeah, sure. So, I've been into big organizations operating big DLOs in the UK in the last 12 months, sort of £5 million operations, and they are delivering everything through a paper-based system. Crazy paper-based systems. You wouldn't believe it. Where if IT was brought in, it would completely eradicate all of them processes, forcing an operative on site to be able to fill in his daily paperwork, his feedback, his job completion, so that someone on a screen at all times, whether it be a resident or a management team, can see the data there, that something's been done and how it's been done, and if there's any problems from it that need to be addressed. Previously, people were filling a piece of paperwork in, going to site, filling it in, signing it, getting residents to sign it, bringing it back. People were scanning it and then uploading it into the cloud, and then no one ever retrieved this data, and it was a huge job if they wanted to. We can have all that information at the touch of our fingertip at a very small cost. As I say, I go into a lot of housing associations and they haven't got these systems in their DLOs now. At Greenfingers, our private contracting arm that we had in the past, 20 odd years ago, we had an IT system that we built based on a Microsoft product, but we built it, and it would text message people and tell them we were coming in and ask them for feedback, and the client could access to look at all the historical data. Very basic system, but we're going back 20 years. I'm still seeing now how DLOs that haven't got anything like this now, and this stuff's available online on license, where you could have a team using it within an hour by downloading it and getting running with it, and it costing you less than £100 a month. Some clients, when I go in and say this, they go, "Oh, that's great, but is this going to cost 100k and take 2 years to introduce?" No, this is going to cost £100 for that team, and they're going to have it this afternoon. That's how simple it is. It'll work on the tablet, and away they go. So that's a huge one, and a huge example, really, about IT.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. Well, that sort of wraps things up for us, but I'd just like to thank you for your time, Steve. And if anyone watching the video would like any further information from Steve or anyone else in our team, or to arrange an initial conversation about an audit for your housing association, you can contact us using the information below. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, look forward to people getting in touch. Thank you.